In January, Danny and I took a 23-day cruise to Antarctica around the tip of South America. I'm going to share with you a few of our memories and photos. Hope you enjoy the trip with us. We started our trip in Santiago, Chile, where we met the tour group, Travel with Alan, that booked our trip for us. The night before we left to get on the ship, they hosted a folk dance show and dinner, and so we got to see some fun musicians and dancers. I'll share a little bit of that with you. The next day, we boarded our bus to head to the port where we were going to get on our ship. But on the way, they gave us a city tour, a bus tour through the city, visited their beautiful cathedral, some art museums, and learned a little bit about the history of this beautiful city. Although we tested negative the day before our cruise, 2 days after getting on the ship tested everyone, and Danny and I both tested positive for COVID. So we were quarantined those first 6 days of our cruise to our room. We were treated very well. The medical staff was outstanding, and food delivered to our room. Fortunately, since we had a balcony, we were able to enjoy some of the Chilean fjords from our balcony, and our first port of call, which we had to stay in our stateroom for, we watched from our balcony the floating fish farms, the beautiful Andes mountains of southern Chile, and also those glaciers, Patagonian glaciers in the Andes mountain. Puntas Arenas, Chile was the first port after we were released from quarantine. And I took a city tour and tour to a historic settlement near Puntas Arenas. The lower right were some Vietnamese slave fishing boats that were anchored offshore. They fish for squid down there, and the workers on these ships are indentured, basically slaves. Not very fun for them, for sure. The historic settlement was Fort Blunes. I believe it was one of the first, if not the first, settlement on the tip of Chile. And fascinating history, very rough weather. They didn't stay there too long. We also visited a visitor center near Fort Blunes that had a huge wall-size video playing scenes of marine mammals from South America. Take a look at this. These are penguins that are fishing this school of fish, and watch what happens next. Here comes a great big whale. Ate the entire school of fish and one penguin. Great videos. This is one of many videos they were showing. From there, we spent a day cruising Glacier Alley in the Beagle Channel. This place you could see huge glaciers that coat the southern Andes mountains. Andes, yes. And then we headed to Ushuaia, Argentina. Now Ushuaia is at the southern tip of Argentina. This is the port where most of the Antarctic expeditions start their trip. You can see several cruise ships. The smaller cruise ships are all headed to Antarctica. There's a National Geographic Explorer, a couple of Viking ships, and a couple of other ships I'm not familiar with. the yellow and orange ship in the upper picture, that would be an Antarctic expedition ship, research vessel. I'm not sure about that military ship. Looked pretty interesting to me. Very busy community. Took a catamaran trip from our ship that day to see some of the birds and wildlife around Ushuaia in the Beagle Channel. Saw thousands of birds, rock shags, Antarctic shags, those are Antarctic cormorants, Antarctic terns, so many beautiful birds. And as you can see, most of them are white and black. And in the middle we had a sea lion, a group of sea lions hanging out with the shags. From there we cruised down to Cape Horn. Now if you're not familiar with it, Cape Horn is at the tip of South America, and before the Panama Canal, all ships going from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean had to navigate around Cape Horn, which has a notorious reputation for rough waters. Lots of ships have gone down in these waters. The day we were there was calm and beautiful. You can see the lighthouse, and there's a family that actually lives at that lighthouse year-round. It is managed by the Chilean government. The albatross fly around Cape Horn regularly. They are amazing birds, huge birds that can fly a couple thousand miles in a single day on the wind. Amazing. And at the top of Cape Horn there's an albatross monument to the mariners that lost their lives around Cape Horn, and a poem that says, "I am the albatross that awaits you at the end of the world. I am the forgotten souls of dead mariners who passed Cape Horn from all the oceans of the world. But they did not die in the furious waves. Today they sail on my wings toward eternity in the last crack of the Antarctic winds." Beautiful, majestic birds, special place. From Cape Horn we headed down to the Antarctic Peninsula, and on our way we had two outstanding lecturers that were experts in Antarctica. They gave us presentations on what we could expect in terms of the wildlife, the geology, the climate, and also the governance. Antarctic is governed by a treaty. Several nations entered into a treaty in 1959, and that treaty continues to govern the management of this special place today. In essence, Antarctica is managed for research and conservation. There's no military presence allowed. There is no commercial exploitive activities allowed. No mining, no commercial fishing of any kind is allowed in the Antarctic. Very impressive. Our ship was not allowed to stop in Antarctica. We were the largest cruise ship allowed in the Antarctic Peninsula, so we got to observe it from our decks. The first place that we visited was Deception Island, which is a volcanic caldera, and we got to see our first penguins. These are chinstrap penguins on the beaches of Deception Island. We also got to see lots of penguins swimming and flying through the water. They really are impressive to watch. Glaciers and waterfalls tumbling into the ocean. From Deception Island, we visited two channels, Lemar and Neumayer Channel. The weather was a little bit rough. Started to see lots of glaciers and some wildlife and other cruise ships. In those channels, we saw our first Gentoo penguins. You can see them in the middle picture. They jump out of the water onto the cliffs, and they make their way up to rock outcrops to lay their eggs and raise their young. The brown you see on the snow is penguin poop. So there's a huge colony of penguins that use this area. And the next day, we got to start seeing icebergs and whales and more penguins. Really impressive. The weather was a little bit rough, but oh, the scenery was spectacular. When the weather was rough and it was chilly, you could see ice crystallize on the surface of the water. That's what you're seeing in the upper left photo. Birds, other ships in these channels, and of course, lots of Gentoo penguins. Beautiful birds. Our ship was not able to stop, but the smaller cruise ships, they could send some of their guests out on Zodiacs to walk on the shore, and that's what you're seeing in the picture above, this group of tourists that had an opportunity to get out and walk up to the penguins. We got to see them from a distance. This particular channel, we were one of 4 cruise ships that day. Busy place. The whales were incredible. Lots of humpback whales. We saw some orcas, and of course penguins swimming in groups, schools. I can't remember what they're called, flocks, group. You can see in the upper picture surfacing humpback whale, and then in the back of that, a group of penguins swimming along. You're going to watch a little video that somebody took from the front deck of the ship. How close they were.
Man, I can't even like keep them both in the...
And more penguins. Fascinating birds. Here's a little video snippet of a group of Gentoo penguins on an iceberg. The light blue...
And there's a big bird sitting over there.
Light blue water you see is part of the iceberg underwater. These penguins are headed out to swim.
They're just the penguins, huh? You're just talking about the penguins. Oh, yeah. Oh, cool. Oh, I mean, I wish I could see them a little bit better jumping in, but they're... Wow, that is super awesome. That is super awesome.
Super awesome is about right to describe what we were seeing. The next day we started getting into some huge icebergs. These icebergs are big as buildings. I mean, they're just huge. And we got to be very close to them. You can see in the lower left picture, our ship is right next to these icebergs, gorgeous icebergs. Our captain was very excited about this and did a great job of keeping us safe and letting us get up close and personal. More glaciers getting ready to calve and icebergs. And of course, lots more whales, cormorants or shags. Spectacular country down there. After the Antarctic Peninsula, we headed up to Elephant Island. This is the place where Shackleton's crew spent 18 months camped on the island waiting to be rescued. And you can imagine, it's a really rough island. We got to see albatross and terns flying around the island. Really rough place to have to spend a year and a half. Can't even imagine it. But they were pretty tough. After Antarctica, we headed up to the Faulklan Islands. Now, about half of the time, seas are too rough for cruise ships to come into the Faulklan Islands. So we were really lucky. It was a beautiful day. The weather was great. This is a very quaint British community. You can see those red telephone booths. I know young people probably have no idea what a telephone booth is. Don't see them very often anymore. Community is really nice. The lower right is the Church of England's cathedral, and it has signs all along the cathedral of mariners that have lost their lives, or people that lost their lives fighting for the Falkland Islands in the 1982 war. I was lucky enough to hike out to a beach with penguins. These are gentoo and king penguins. King penguins look like a small version of the emperor penguins. Beautiful birds. They weren't the least bit afraid of people. They were just doing their thing. So majestic and breathtaking. Great, great birds. And also lots of other birds on the Falkland Islands. The Magellanic oystercatcher, Falkland Islands flightless steamer duck, greater upland goose. Those were just a few that we got to see there. After the Falkland Islands, we went up to Argentina, to Puerto Madryn, and we got to take a tour to see a Magellanic penguin colony. This is the largest Magellanic penguin colony in the world. They were everywhere. And we also saw guanacos, which are native alpaca type animals related to alpacas and llamas, but native to South America. You'll see a little video clip here of some of the chicks of the Magellanic penguins pestering mom. They were molting, but mom was clearly getting tired and ready to feed these babies. Beautiful birds, very cute, quite the characters. And now we're getting closer to the end of our trip. We stopped at Punta del Este in Uruguay, visited a museum famous for Salvador Dali sculptures and some beautiful artwork in that museum. Also, city tour around Punta del Este. And then the last day before reaching Buenos Aires, we spent most of a day in Montevideo. Walked around the town a little bit. And on February 1st, our ship docked in Buenos Aires. The final stop in our trip, we took a day tour on a river boat to see these rivers and these little communities along the river. These are places where people vacation. Very close to Buenos Aires, a really nice area. And our very last day, we went to a ranch near Buenos Aires to see some demonstrations of horse wrangling, and also you can't go to Argentina, of course, without seeing a tango demonstration. And that was our trip. This last slide is the certificate they gave us to prove that we've been to Antarctica. The lower right, you can see a model of the ship we were on, the Holland America Oosterdam. That model is made completely of Legos. It's really impressive. And one of the last nights there, our room stewards left us with towel dogs because they knew we were missing our puppies. Thanks for joining us on this little visit of our trip, and hope you can go down there someday. Highly recommend it.